I was probably about 10 years old when the Beach Boys had their first hit in Europe. 12 years old when the then only 23 years old Brian Wilson composed Pet Sounds, which was, in the words of the great Paul McCartney, the greatest pop album ever made. And the song God Only Knows was the greatest pop song, in his view, ever made.
Between June and October of 1972, the Beach Boys, their family and staff settled down in the Dutch village of Bambrugge to record their new album, not surprisingly called Holland. They did so in the middle of nowhere, in a converted garage building next to a cow pasture. 45 years later, a Dutchman got the crazy idea to convert Beach Boys music into classical symphonies. This story starts with Rob van Velde, shipping entrepreneur, wine merchant, and former cricket international, who got this idea a mere 8 miles away from where the Beach Boys were situated in 1972. Here's the location of the Wedgeview Studios, not far from Bambrugge, in the small village of Woerdense Verlaat. This studio is also located next to cow pastures. The studio was formerly a farm, and all present studio spaces were formerly occupied by cattle or their food. Rob van Velde started the studio in 2006 together with Roeland Jacobs, more brilliant than crazy. Roeland is a member of the famous Dutch jazz dynasty Jacobs and stepson of the well-known Dutch pop and classical star Thijs van Lier. No wonder, music runs through his veins. Rob and Roeland have done numerous national and international music productions together. For example, they were recently involved in a production of jazz singer and multiple Edison Prize winner Faye Klaasen for her album Close to You, as well as the Edison-winning production Saudade by trumpet player Teus Nobel. Saudade was an album featuring the lesser-known songs of the great Brazilian composer Antonio Carlos Jobim in a symphonic style, and that is what triggered the idea to convert Beach Boys music into classical music.
I got involved with the work of the Beach Boys at a young age. And of course, recently I refreshed my mind. I listened to all their music, and eventually I took out those songs that were the most harmonic and symphonic songs of all. So we never really looked at the greatest hits. Of course, there are some well-known songs, but there are many relatively unknown songs that we have chosen for this particular project, because simply we knew what we were going to do, and we have taken the songs that suited the project.
To be honest, I knew only a few hits of them, hit records, and I feel a little bit sorry that I didn't hear anything before, because it really deserves it. It belongs to your musical education, because it's a unique way of making music, composing music. And I was raised with jazz music, but this is really sometimes coming very close to jazz music, but also very close to classical music. It involves every style of music, actually. So it was very nice to work on this project and learn their music.
Well, I think that my knowledge of Beach Boys music before this project was the same as the general public. When I knew the hits, I knew, of course, God Only Knows, because that's a worldwide song. I knew one of the tunes that was actually translated in Portuguese. So it was famous in Brazil. So when I heard it, I was like, oh, yeah, of course I heard this tune before. But I didn't know the original. So yeah, I didn't know the most obscure. So definitely that was a pleasure to dive into the Beach Boys music, the side B's.
To my own shame, I must admit that I didn't really know Beach Boys music I knew the Beach Boys in se, but not that you could ask me, can you please sing a song of the Beach Boys? But now, having heard this, it's actually quite hard for me to imagine that these initially were pop songs. It sounds so symphonic, it sounds so original, that you might think that these are compositions for symphonic orchestra.
Obviously, I know the surf hits of the Beach Boys. They have performed at Night of the Proms in 2015, and they've played there the songs most people, I would say, if they know Beach Boys songs, would know the songs they performed at that show. So it was a discovery of a lot of melodies that I would have never attributed to the Beach Boys. I actually never heard the originals. I only heard the demos and the recording by the orchestra. And it could have been composed at some moments. It reminded me of Ennio Morricone, and it could have been composed by any famous classical composer, as far as I'm concerned.
So I got a list of Rob with a compilation of all the songs he wanted to record. And well, not only the songs in the full length, but he wanted pieces of the songs and then mash them up and let them return later on in the symphony. And even he managed to use a melody of one song above the harmonies of another song. So the puzzle was huge, but I think we managed quite well at the end.
During the 60s, the American Beach Boys were the rivals of the English Beatles, with whom they had a great virtue in common: the writing of wonderful and groundbreaking pop music. There was, however, a big difference. The Beach Boys wrote many instrumental tracks, which was a great help for this classical project. And whenever they sang, it involved a lot of close harmony singing, or sometimes just a cappella for their more poetic songs. All these elements provided a promising start for the conversion of the Beach Boys' legacy into classical music by a symphonic orchestra. But the challenges were pretty big too. Many of the Beach Boys' songs were short, with sudden fade-outs. The answer was found by having musical themes return in a similar or different fashion throughout the symphonies in order to have the maximum use of the glorious tunes that Brian Wilson and co. produced.
When I listened to the entire Beach Boys works, as is known commonly, I initially selected 37 songs, out of which ultimately 33 were used for 7 symphonies. The biggest challenge was which songs to choose for which symphonies, and that was a painstaking work that well, was one of the few benefits of the first Corona lockdown, because March, April and May 2020 gave me the time to go over this painstakingly and select all the specific songs for all these specific symphonies. After the song selection, I started to select on the basis of tempo, which gave some comfort, but was not the ultimate solution. So it was a long process, but ultimately I worked out which songs were going to be used for which symphonies, and then I had to do a lot of cutting and gluing, because we had songs which we used repeatedly during the symphonies, like an ordinary symphony. The worst thing that can happen actually is to do something like this and turn it into a medley. This is the one thing we were trying to avoid.
Ja, met veel meer impact.
When that work was completed, I sent everything to Roeland Jacobs, whom I consider to be one of the star arrangers in the Netherlands, and he started to work on it. That took several months, and he came forward with his proposals, And he made MIDI files of it, and then together we worked on these MIDI files, not changing all that much because that would be an insult to the originality of the music. But of course we added a few things here and there, and we had to take decisions as far as the tones were concerned, especially also the gluing of the songs together. That was a huge talent.
It's pop music in basic, and we are not allowed to use any rhythm section, so no bass, no drums, no guitar. They were excluded in the orchestra. I needed to find a way to give the rhythmic information a place in the orchestra. With Brazilian music, when you play the chords, there's already rhythm. You even don't need any drums or percussion. That already gives the Brazilian rhythm. But for pop music, the rhythm is really done by the bass and the drum and the guitar. And I didn't have any of that in the orchestra, so that was the challenge.
The answers that Roeland found to these challenges were multifold. Obviously, in addition to the traditional classical percussion section, he had the basses to use. He also required the other string sections to perform that role, and in the end, Roeland utilized all of the available sections to fulfill the rhythmic performance, which included piano, harpsichord, brass, vibraphone, marimba, and even harp if and when required. He had to convince classical-oriented musicians who were normally not involved in playing the rhythms to do just that. Another factor was that, due to the corona lockdowns, many musicians had not been in a position to play as a symphonic group for recordings or live performances for quite a while, and now they were to be thrown in the deep. Nevertheless, the search for an orchestra to play these symphonies was helped by the long-lasting friendship between Rob and Jan Verreke. Jan is the founder of the Antwerp Philharmonic Orchestra, an orchestra already specialized in combining pop with classical music, which appeared to be tailor-made for this project.
The Antwerp Philharmonic Orchestra actually is about 30 years old. It's the permanent orchestra of Night of the Proms, a show that annually tours Europe. I'm since 5 years the manager of the orchestra, which means that I contract all the players when the orchestra has a job to do, has a concert to play or a recording to do. Because of their participation at Night of the Proms, have played all sorts of music, ranging from Tchaikovsky, Beethoven and other famous classical composers, to Seal or Beach Boys in 2015, Sting, Donna Summer. There's a whole list of artists that we have worked with. James Brown, to name another one. Nile Rodgers from Chic, Tears for Fears. It's a very long list.
Another big advantage was that the conductor of this orchestra is Alexandra Arrieche. Roeland and Rob had the pleasure of working with her previously on various projects back in 2019, one of which was the Saudade project, which triggered the idea of this classical album based on Beach Boys music. Alexandra is Brazilian but resides in Nevada, which is next door to California, home of the Beach Boys and everything they stood for. She started conducting ever since the age of 16. And apart from conducting the Antwerp Philharmonic, she also conducts the Henderson Symphony Orchestra near Las Vegas in the United States. By working together with the Antwerp Philharmonic Orchestra, the immediate consequence was the inclusion of the services of Dominique van Hagenberg as orchestrator of the project. It took Dominique 3 months to prepare all the parts for as many as 60 musicians who were about to participate in this mega project. The recording took 3 days, 7 symphonies equaling 77 minutes of classical Beach Boys music in a huge recording studio with as many as 64 microphones hanging above the orchestra for the purpose of a 3D audio recording. Basically, the only studio suitable for this project was the Galaxy Studio in the small town of Mol in Belgium. Built on springs, this studio has the reputation of being the most quiet one in Western Europe. In addition to the recording, this studio was also the venue for 1 extra day of dubbing and fine-tuning, 2 days of stereo mixing, and 2 days of Auro 3D mixing. This mega studio is the life work of Wilfried van Balen and his brother. Interestingly, they also started this studio back in the early 80s in a piggery behind their parents' home. It almost seems like all interesting studios in the Low Countries have a history that is connected with livestock farming in one way or another.
Galaxy Studios is a very special studio because it's one of the biggest, largest facilities for recording music in the west of Europe. For sure on the continental Europe. And basically what is special about these studios is that we can house a whole orchestra whilst we have a control room that is professional sound equipped. So rather than having orchestras that are being recorded in concert halls, like usually, and then you have to go there with some equipment, or the concert hall control rooms are not quite as high standard as in music studios, we have a combination of both here. We have a music studio where we can do pop music, rock music, but also big orchestral music. That's why we do a lot of film score recordings as well in Galaxy Studios.
Try to finish a project like this, you're not going to be penny-wise, pound-foolish. We knew from the start this was going to be a really big project, and that's why all the choices that one has to make, it better be the correct choices. And that also counts for the choice of the studio, of course, working with the Antwerp Philharmonic. That means that many of the people work and live in Belgium. So the obvious choice for us was to go for the Galaxy Studios, which is the biggest and best there is for a project like this. So we're very happy.
The long notes for the brass.
That sounds cool.
Because that talks
That's what you mean. Yeah.
That talks to the woodwinds that we just changed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So
we can have a little.
let's put a little bit of an accent, but keep legato. Okay.
Yeah. And then we would have need less of the top brass and more of the piccolo flute.
Okay. Okay.
Well, woodwinds in general, but mainly piccolo a lot more.
And what about the balance on the 36 and 37? Because I also heard from here a lot of trumpets, not much of the trombones.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So trumpets
okay.
less and trombones can stay.
Okay. Because I thought that you were talking about letter D.
Also.
More of accent, I think.
We were just thinking less accent or more.
So I worked with Roeland before in the album Saudade, which we won the Edson Prize, and I'm very proud of it. And I think that the similarities is the way that Roeland explore the different sounds of the orchestra. He's really creative, and I could see that in the Saudade as well. The way he worked with the strings was very unique, and this also the way that the instruments he chose for this project was also like very unusual. Because there is like harpsichord, there is celesta, there is bass clarinet. So those instruments, we rarely see them in a classical setup. They are very, very special. You're going to see them in more modern 20th century music, but definitely not behind and in the 19th century. So I think that that's very, very special, and that's something that I would only expect from Roeland.
The final symphony and the grand finale of the album, as well as the concert, is Pet Symphony. Pet Symphony, of course, is derived from the iconic Beach Boys album Pet Sounds, which by nearly all of us is being regarded as the masterpiece of Brian Wilson. This album was released in 1966. Brian Wilson was only 23 years old when he wrote all the songs for this album. And it was the Beach Boys' counter-reaction on the Beatles LP Rubber Soul. Brian Wilson thought that with Rubber Soul, the Beatles entered a new music era, and he thought that the Beach Boys were behind. So when the band had to tour to the Far East, Brian stayed at home, got together with the best session musicians of the West Coast, and they recorded the album, only to be sung later on by all the Beach Boys when they had returned from the tour. Actually, Paul McCartney was the person that thought that when Pet Sounds came out, it was the best pop album so far. And the Beatles thought that they were now the ones that had to make a leap forward. So actually the Beatles responded with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's basically those two albums which are the best pop albums by the Rolling Stone magazine of all time. So that shows something. Obviously, it is the longest symphony that we've written. It's taking more than 20 minutes. And of course, we had no other alternative but to end the symphony with the most beautiful song of all, which is God Only Knows, which is the first time that the word God actually formed part of a title of any song, which was spectacular in its own right.
It's very nice. I think it's also been treated very nice with the orchestrations, and it makes it, I think, a treat for anyone who wants to hear some new orchestral music, because that is what I think it is. This project brings new orchestral music, and that doesn't happen very often, I think.
I think it's a dream, and I would really, really love to bring this project all over the world, and why not Brazil as well?
I have to thank my mother now. It's not for nothing that on our funeral we played God Only Knows. My mother was a great fan of the Beach Boys, bought all the albums, and gave me a chance as a young guy to listen to all the albums. And I think it's fair to say that without my mother, this album would never have taken place in the first place. So thanks, Mom. I hope upstairs, somewhere there, you will enjoy the album as much as we did making it.